John was the state architect under Governor Reagan and the first little bit of Jerry Brown's term. When Jerry appointed, as governors will do, a replacement state architect, he didn't kind of bother to check whether his candidate to be the replacement state architect had an architect's license in California. He didn't. That sounds like Jerry Brown, doesn't it? We love the guy. What are you going to do? So John stayed on for the first part of Jerry Brown's term, and then when Sim Vanderin finally got his architect's license in California and took the job, John came over to be the head of the restoration of the state capitol, 1976 to 1981. In February of '77, I was just finishing my active duty tour in the U.S. Navy, and Carol and I came back to Sacramento and bought a house on the Highway 50 side of town so that she could finish her degree at Sac State. So I was on this project to restore California's capital. Carol wanted me to point out, that's me there in the white coat. And it truly was a labor of love. Now, I was several rungs down the organization ladder from where John was, but he was someone we knew. We had a lot of fun working on the project. When the project finished, I went on to other construction companies. John retired, and he began writing this book. Because of the interest in being on the Capitol, I later served on the Historic State Capitol Commission as a Senate appointee, a body designed to give advice to the legislature about the only building they own. The legislature owns this building. The executive branch owns all the other buildings in California. So while I was serving there, John passed away, and his widow reached out to the commission and said, what should I do with this manuscript? And so our executive director received it, inventoried it, and had it sent with the family's gift of deed to the state archives. So roll forward a couple of decades. When I retired, I got permission from the archives to edit the book, put the illustrations in the right place, correct some grammar, correct some snide comments that John had made about his political opponents during the project, and get it published by the California State Capitol Museum Volunteer Association. Isn't that a long title? So those are the people who volunteer to give you tours when you go down to the state capitol. Great group. So they are the publisher. So it's not just a book about architecture. There's plenty in there about all the materials, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but there are some other important stories here. One is John fully goes into how close we came to people voting to tear down the Capitol. Oh, wow. Ouch, yes. Well, it was seismically very risky. John's predecessor as state architect had had a seismic study done, and no one wanted to talk about it too much. But basically, John would say that gravity is holding the bricks together and sand is holding them apart, because the mortar that was used had a very sparing cement content, and in places it wasn't doing a very good job of keeping the bricks apart. And the human termites, we'll see some pictures a little later in the presentation, had done their best to find a way to get some ducting through the brick wall. Well, how about here? Bang! And so a lot of damage had been done to the building in some of the most sensitive places. So it wasn't a clear decision, but John goes into that. He also talks about the fact at that time, I'm probably pretty confident that 99% of all the construction contracts awarded by California for buildings were hard bid. The designer finished complete plans and specs. They were put out on the street, And the low bidder, the most optimistic builder you could find who could get a bid bond and a performance bond, he's the winner, he's the one you got building your building. John wanted something different for this restoration. He wanted a team where the builder was on board during the design, heck, during the concept. How are we going to seismically strengthen this rickety old building? And so he found a way to do that. He had the legislature exempt the project from the rules that said hard bid only. And he goes into the detail of how he assembled the team and what style of contract. For those of you who are beer drinkers, you'll be glad to know the style of contract was one borrowed from Anheuser-Busch, who uses a team approach to the design of their breweries. And then finally, we get to what for most of us would be the fun part. Where do you find people to do old technology building projects with skills that have attrited because there's no demand for them? Where do you go to get cast iron ornamentation done? Sutter Foundry up in on Highway 49, Sutter Creek, was where we had our castings made to replace things that had broken beyond repair. So he spends a lot of time in the book on this subject. So something for everybody in there. He includes a big excerpt on the early history of where California's capital was to be. And he gets permission to include this excerpt from the California Department of Parks, because Parks had put a couple of people onto the team with John. We called them the Parkies, we're so clever. And one of them, Lucinda Woodward, wrote a fabulous history, a very complete history of the tug of war about where California's capital should be. Starts in San Jose, goes to Benicia, where General Vallejo said, I'll donate the land here, back to San Jose, up to Sacramento once. It didn't work out too well. Where else did it go? Maybe Vallejo, thank you, very good. Back to Vallejo, and then finally to Sacramento, where the city of Sacramento assembled the parcel of land where our California capital sits now. So that's in the book too, and as good a short history of that period that I've ever read. Of course, you know about the floods of early Sacramento, and that didn't help our case in arguing to be the permanent capital. When Governor Stanford was going to his swearing in the Capitol, he had to get there by rowboat. That wasn't too good. And then construction begins 1860. The style of California construction contracting at that time was that the state designated the architect as the clerk of the works and handed him an annual appropriation, and he direct hired laborers and direct hired purchase of materials until the money ran out. And then they closed down the project and waited for the next session of the legislature. Yes, I couldn't make this up, right? What a system. But that was the way government funded things in those days, a year at a time. And so it did take from 1860 to about 1872 to complete. But we were talking as the project started, you know, this is an amazing design for 1860s California. In 1846, the primary industry of the state of California was slaughtering cattle in the fields, stripping off their hides, and shipping the hides around the Horn to the East Coast to make leather belts for the factories back east. That was our industry. 14 years later, we fought over where the capital should sit. We've chosen a design. It's that design, holy cow, talk about reaching for the stratosphere. It's that design, but we had the craftsmen here. They didn't come to build the capital. They came to become rich in the gold rush, but they brought that talent with them, And so we had the skilled people who could do this. Pretty amazing. So John goes into this history. There's a picture from about 1890. The Capitol Park is an arboretum. And by the time that the planting had been done, they believed they had a plant from every continent, a plant from every nation on earth in that arboretum. They had a wonderful catalog of it, and the press was very favorable in bragging on how great an arboretum our Capitol Park was. But look at the building standing alone with no other buildings around it and think, we love it, we think it's grand today, but think what an impression that building must have made. The legislature moved in about 1869. There was still construction ongoing. 1872, park is mature by 1890. So it's our beloved image. A lot of people ask, how come we have the two colors of granite? Do you know that story? So we had a railroad going from Sacramento to Folsom. That's the first railroad in California. And so the quarry up at Folsom Prison won the contract to supply the granite. But when the Big Four began their railroad and got as far as Rockland, they considered that they ought to be able to compete to supply that granite. So that's the lighter colored granite. Crocker was the construction foreman, and Stanford was the governor, and so they rebid, and Crocker got the bid. Yeah, you know, it's kind of a little funny, but you know, that's our image, and we absolutely love our capital. But I've developed kind of a shorthand description. There comes a time in the life of a building that are analogous to the teenage awkward years. If you can get the building safely through that period, all of a sudden now it's historic. Ooh, all right, let's save this thing. But for a while it's just an old, drafty, too tall are the floors, the story heights are ridiculous, and it's not pretty, and we can try and modernize it, but you know, it's not very good building, and our state capitol went through that time frame. Imagine a dropped acoustical grid ceiling. Ooh, modern, right? And we'll put the ducting through the transom of the doorway. What is the purpose? Anyone know what's the purpose of having this transom above the doorway? To let the hot air out, right? No air conditioning, no fans in the building when it was first built. So the story heights are deliberately high, so the warm air rises, and the transoms are open so it can flow out of the building. But we don't want to go through the transom. We'll just cut the doorway in half, you know, and that way we get space for an office. And we want the press in the building, so when we snap our fingers, they'll come and report what wisdom we have. So we'll build a mezzanine halfway between the story height, and of course there's only one exit in and only one exit out. I'm not sure why the fire marshal, oh yeah, he's in the executive branch, isn't he? So yeah, that's okay. So we have these awkward years where people are doing some pretty terrible things to our Capitol building. Including painting over all of that Victorian colorful art that you can see recreated today in the Capitol with compatibility green. This will really cut down on the maintenance because every room's the same color, every wall's the same color, and the feds did this too. So we got this building that's seismically bad, and it isn't pretty anymore. A lot of the nice stuff has been taken out. Why don't we just build a new Capitol building? And we'll have a tower for each house of the legislature, and we'll have the executive branch and the chambers down in the middle. So this concept was to be built on the other side of 15th Street, and it was really a pretty popular idea. They had renderings done. They had this idea going, and what would we do with the old Capitol? We might tear it down. we could store things in it. That's what we'll do. We won't tear it down, we'll just store stuff in it. And that idea was going pretty popularly. So John tells the story here, and he was perched safely over in the executive branch while this was going on. The politicians who supported this idea got voted out as the speaker, and the incoming speaker made the decision, we're not going to do the Collier Towers, we're going to restore the Capitol. While I was on the commission, I actually went over and did the research looking for the bills and the bill memoranda and trying to understand. I wanted to find that hero who rose up and said, no, preservation is what we have to do, because I wanted to tell that story. I didn't find him. I don't think he exists. I asked Dan Visnich, who served as a legislative aide during the reconstruction of the Capitol, Dan, why was preservation chosen? Oh, it was to poke fingers in the eyes of the guys who wanted the new building. That was it, pure politics. I didn't want to believe Dan, but I do now. It was really lucky that we got the decision to restore. So John writes in the book about how did Welton Becket get to be the designer of the restoration. They had been hired earlier on to do part of that analysis that the previous state architect asked to be conducted on the building. So they had a little bit of a head start, but they had to compete. They had a very important guy on their team, Rager Vigian. FAIA, by the way, means Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. So the Architects of America designate those who have made the greatest contribution to their professions as a fellow. And Ray was on the Welton Becket team as the historical consultant who could advise on technique of restoration, but also strategic approaches. What are we going to save? What are we going to replicate? What are we going to make new and put up? Choosing the builder was not going to be hard bid, and so this was done based on qualifications, and John tells some very good stories that the Joint Rules Committee of the legislature, who owns the building, is going to select the builder. And of course, the Southern Californios, they want to get a Southern California guy. The San Francisco Mafia, they want to get a San Francisco. So Sacramento-based Continental Heller and San Francisco-based Swinnerton and Wahlberg form a joint venture. And they compete and they are selected. John had one rule. He said, okay, in order to cast a vote, all members of the Joint Rules Committee have to be here for all of the presentations of the teams that are competing. If you leave, and if you've ever been in a legislative hearing, the people up on the dais, the members of the committee, they're coming and going at all time. And once the chairman sees that he has a quorum, he immediately calls for the vote. And then after the vote, he continues asking the witnesses to come up and argue whether we should pass this vote or not. But John came up with that rule and he enforced it. And then he put a team together, a team approach, where he wanted the designer to accept the builder as an equal partner in the design, and he wanted the builder to accept the designer as an equal partner in the means and methods. How shall we do this? In what sequence shall we do it? And this was uncomfortable for them at that time. Today we have a construction technique called design build that the state uses very well. Actually, the executive branch really knows how to do that very, very well in California. They win awards for it, as a matter of fact. But all of that, figuring out this and using the contract from Anheuser-Busch, that's really a true story. That's also in the book. Here's the team photo. Look for the shortest guy there. So that's me. That's John Worsley. This is Michael J. Heller, who is a legend in Sacramento construction. The Continental Heller Construction is a firm that's not around anymore, but that's our group. Let's see, who else? So that's Dale Dwyer, who is John's assistant. That's Dan Visnich, who is the staffer who told me I would not find a hero, and I didn't. This is Bob Middaugh, and Bob was our superintendent, a World War II veteran who had built bases for the Army Corps of Engineers in the South Pacific, and Bob had very colorful language. I won't repeat all of it tonight, but very colorful. You clearly understood what Bob was telling you. Memorable words. So, the building is ours, the legislature moves out, and what do we find? We find pilasters supporting a heavier load up on the floor above where the brick has separated from the surrounding wall. Just absolutely separated. This girder is supposed to be holding up that roof, but in fact, the roof is holding up the girder because someone decided a duct should go through that opening about there. What do you say, about here? Sure, bam! You know, we knock a hole into it. Some of it was a little scary. It's not all bad news though. As we were taking off the finishes, we found an original elevator transom done in a beautiful bronze work. And so the new elevators that are on the first floor, second, third floor, have replica transoms built from the same transom that we found historically. We took out of the building base, door frames, doors, window frames, light fixtures, cast iron interior ornaments. We took out everything of what is called the historic fabric with the idea that we were going to return the building to the way it looked on the day of the 1906 earthquake. On that day, we had electricity, so power generated at the Folsom Powerhouse. So we could put in electric lights, replica of the time lights, and that would be okay. We had elevators in the building in 1906, so we could have elevators. We would have to hide the air conditioning grills and diffusers because they weren't around, but we managed to hide those pretty well. We found some original colors, and there were a couple of really celebratory days where we practically knocked off work. Behind a duct on the first floor, we found a piece of the original frieze. A frieze is a decorative element from the ceiling down, and this poppy motif frieze was found in one of the corners behind a duct. And everyone's running around yelling, you gotta come see this. Delicate plaster work, we'll see some more of that, and then painted appropriately. On the first floor of the rotunda, we had these niches, which had been part of the original construction, had been covered up because on that level we installed the Matthews murals, which are very high quality murals by an important early California artist depicting the Europeans arriving in California and progress since then. When we took the murals off, we found the niches were the original color. And so we were able to get those colors correctly. A lot of the other colors had been painted over compatibility green. There's a story in there of finding in between these niches, you know, finding what kind of looked like a pattern, but we weren't sure what it was. So John hired a crazy guy from San Diego who has this new technique. He brings up a xenon lamp and brings it within inches of the paint, and then he pops it on like a flash bulb. Then he moves it over an inch and pops it again. Then he takes his brush and a dry brush and he brushes off the paint that he's just fried, but like a millimeter at a time. And he can take down the paint layers one layer at a time. And then our resident artist, Michael Casey, says, I recognize that pattern. He walked across the street to the State Library and came back with a big old fat book of patterns you could purchase in the time frame of 1860 to decorate your home. And it's the griffin motif. and that's what's drawn onto the panels today. But we wouldn't have been able to find that. The photography of the time, of course, was black and white. So the colors that you now see in the dome of the rotunda of our Capitol are our best estimates of what we think the Victorians would have painted, but only black and white photography survived. Now, this is hard to describe in just words. John does a much better job in the book. He's got step 1, step 2, step 40 of how we seismically strengthened the building. One of the biggest strategic arguments was, how do you make a building earthquake-proof? It has to resist the movement of the ground that is equivalent to a certain sideways force. Now, the force is mass times acceleration. Acceleration is the number we know. This was a category 2 earthquake or a 1.4 earthquake. We know the force. The mass means the heavier a building is, the greater the force it has to withstand. There's nothing heavier than an old brick building. So one of the key strategies, we've got to lighten the building. And this was really contentious because the inside of the building with these terrible brick walls is very heavy, but on the walls are hung this wonderful plaster, these door frames, these window frames. So the decision was made, we're going to keep the outside walls with its cast iron ornamentation and its granite. We're going to take down the inside walls, come back up with concrete and metal studs and plaster to the same thickness of the wall. So the original door frame goes right back on the same thickness of wall it came from, but that'll be concrete, metal studs, a lot lighter than solid brick. Very contentious, boy, yeah, but we have to take out the historic stuff and put it back. Can't we leave it there? No, we can't, not enlighten the building. So that was the structural system. The green iron stands up, it's braced, and then you put rods through the windows and then tighten up screws to tighten on the inside wood lags that then hold the building like this against those green rods. And then you start tearing down the inside of the building from the top down. So you can see there's the roof over on the south side. So we've taken off the roof structure between the roof and us, our viewpoint. We've knocked down the walls and we're down on the 3rd floor collecting the brick, loading it into those yellow skips, having the crane lift it up and haul it away. So we're taking down the inside walls. Then, on an exterior brick wall, imagine plaster, brick, wood lath, plaster, and that thickness had a nice window frame in it, beautiful window, seat and everything. Now, we take the wooden window frame away, we take away the wooden lath, we chip away 2 layers of brick, we put anchors into the other brick, and then we place gunite, pneumatically applied concrete, and then we're going to put just little metal lath onto the top of that gunite, and that same thickness, now concrete and brick, will receive the same window frame going back in, the same exact thickness. And inspecting this and making sure we got a good job, that's a very important part. By the way, if you blow a good mixture of concrete against sand that you have against brick, that you have sandblasted and wetted, you cannot break them apart. It's like they want to grow together. The bond is that strong. Then when we get down to the basement, then we make a mat foundation. So the whole area, the whole footprint of the building is a foundation, including boring into the old brick exterior wall, putting in reinforcing steel and filling that up with concrete, making what they called a needle beam. So that now the exterior walls are tied to this mat foundation. The rebar is very, very heavy, building strong. The rotunda is a very complex. I'm not even going to try to describe how we did that. First the south wing, then the north wing, then the rotunda. But there's a very good diagram throughout that John explains, you know, here's some original brick with original plaster. Here's new concrete, and we're going up. The interior dome, we reinforce from the inside. The drum, or the round wall that makes the rotunda, we reinforce that from the outside. So here is the brick structure that made the arch that one sees today if you're on the first floor of the rotunda and you're looking up at that beautiful ceiling. The arch that there now is concrete and then metal studs forming that. Originally, the brick masons laid up a brick arch and then some steel reinforcing, and then a brick arch goes, a very shallow arch from the main rotunda arch back to the wall. But seeing this work done and how it was done in the 1860s is really very interesting. This is kind of a wow shot. All of this cast iron ornamentation has been anchored in place by this greenish iron and held in place while we chipped the brick away from it and replaced the brick with reinforced concrete, doing two segments, 1/16 of the circle, then 90 degrees to that, then 45 degrees that, then back 90 degrees from that, until we had replaced all of that brick drum with reinforced concrete, and the cast iron never moved, never left. To have that idea and that sequence and that design work well together with the bracing, you had to have a team of the builders and the designers working together. Some of the replacement material now comes back. Back when we were removing material, we put a camera onto a library cart. Here we are in a library, and we rolled it around the mosaic floor, taking a picture with an aerial camera, like the ones that would hang from an airplane. So we had a color rendering full size of the mosaic floor. We cut them into slabs about that size, 2 feet by 3 feet or 3 feet by 3 feet. And then we sent all the slabs down to the studio of a mosaicist in Southern California by the good California Hispanic name of Hans Scharf. Hans was a wonderful, and his daughter Monica. Hans had been a Luftwaffe interrogator during World War II. Now you think, oh my God, is he hanging people by his ankles and beating them up and trying to get info out of these Air Force pilots that were down? No, Hans came in and said, "You from the Chicago area? How are the Cubs doing this year?" He had lived in America, and he was called kind of the gentleman interrogator. And at the end of the war, about 85 different American pilots, navigators, crew wrote letters in support of how careful and proper Hans had been as an interrogator. He decided to come to America and continue his craft as a mosaicist. So he and his daughter Monica took every chip of the mosaic floor out of its matrix, cleaned it, stacked all the gold chips here, the green ones here, the gray ones here, the black ones here, the white. Then they used the photographs and adhered the mosaic tiles down to a gauze and shipped it back to Sacramento, where their crew laid a mortar bed and then put it back in place. Now the whole second floor south and second floor north is filled with these chips about the size of your thumbnail. But even that is not 1 million chips. It's only about 850,000 chips. 1 million is a big number. But When this was being reinstalled, I had just been promoted to superintendent on the project. I had started as project engineer, and as I'm walking, I can feel there's some waviness in the mosaic floor. And so I talked with Hans Foreman, who was there. I said, you know, guys, as you lay the mosaic tiles down and you roll it and try and make sure it's bedded in that mortar bed, can you see if you can get this straighter? Sure, Dick, absolutely. Carol and I had an assignment in Italy from 1998 to 2000, and we spent a lot of time walking on mosaic floors. They're all wavy. I didn't know what I was talking about. We took all the wooden doors, door frames, window frames over to a warehouse in West Sacramento, and NorCal Millwork is not in business anymore, but they won the contract to, for a time and materials rate, restore all of the wood and then get it ready to bring back to the Capitol. So the wooden base, door frames, window frames, doors. The staircases, these beautiful walnut staircases, so beautiful, and you see replicas of them today. They had been taken out of the Capitol sometime in the 20s in favor of modern steel pan staircases that could give them more space to squeeze in more offices. We got really lucky. There was one run of the stairway that was given to the church next to Sutter's Fort. And so we went over to there, and they gave us the run that is currently running on the south side down to the basement cafeteria area. That's an original bit of the walnut staircase. We built them a replica. They gave us the original. The rest of it, there was not enough walnut on the planet of the size needed to make the stair stringers. So the stairs are built by Burnett and Sons Millwork out of Honduran mahogany and stained walnut. The Eureka tiles, John spends, in my view, a disproportionate time telling of the adventure of finding a way to have the Eureka or Minerva tiles recreated, because the process they had used in 1860 to make those tiles was no longer commercially done by anyone anywhere, not in Britain, not in the US. So he had to find a way to get the correct texture and the correct pattern on those tiles. And so he worked with some people in Sausalito, Heath Ceramics, and he'll tell you the whole story in the book of the failures, you know, trying this run and trying that run, but they've been in the Capitol now and they really were well done. J. Fisher of Fisher Tile, that company is still in business. They laid that tile as well as the Minton tile we'll see here. And Jay was telling me he didn't give a second thought to accepting this experimental product that, you know, kind of Joe McGee came up with to make these tiles. No, he put it down. It was owner furnished material. They've worn very well for 40 years. Here are the Minton tiles. I get a kick out of these. These are solid material, solid yellow, solid red, solid black, solid yellow, that you cut to the right shape and then lay. And Jay was telling a humorous story. We had a panel discussion about this tile, and Jay said his father went on vacation and left him with strict instructions: do not bid this project of laying the Minton tiles. So as soon as his dad was gone, Jay and another Fisher Tile professional put together the bid and won the job. And they gave the job of pre-cutting the tiles in their shop to a young lady apprentice who's still affiliated with the firm. And so she did all the cutting with a lapidary saw, a saw designed to cut gems for jewelry. And that's a much finer cut than what you would expect otherwise. Very good story. Plaster work. John writes extensively about the different kinds of plaster. I mentioned the artist Michael Casey. Michael We had him in 3 or 4 different construction unions by the time the project was done, but he was an artist trained back in Rhode Island, and he came to the project, and every piece of plaster that we took out, he would make a mold and then make lineal feet of each of the designs of different plaster that would be put back in the building. So here's one of his products being offloaded to be installed by the plastering contractor, a joint venture of Meiswinkle, Reeder, Pierce, and they did the work. This work is called parquet plaster, and this is the decorative work that's done when you squeeze plaster out of a very big pastry bag, just the way you decorate cakes. So another story I'll tell that is no credit on me. When I was promoted to superintendent, I became Mike's supervisor. Our plan for doing the ceilings of the museum spaces was that we had already bought bags and bags full of little compo twigs and berries and leaves and things like that you would glue up on the ceiling and then paint it white. That was the way we were going to replicate the parquet ceilings. Michael came to me and he said, "Dick, I've been practicing at home with these pastry bags and different tips. I think I could replicate the ceilings of the Capitol Museum rooms if you'll let me do that instead of the compo." Civil engineer, linear thinker. "Mike, we have a plan. We have a schedule. Follow the plan, follow the schedule." Mike goes away, comes back, makes the second argument. "You gotta let me try this. I'm sure I can do it." Follow the plan, follow the schedule. So I'm in my office in the trailer on site, and I see Michael kind of saunter by my office, thinking nothing of it. And pretty soon, here he comes back, being followed by John Worsley. I wonder what's going on there. Wait about 20 minutes. John comes to my office. "Dick, you can't believe it. Michael's found a way to replicate the ceilings in the original material. That's what we're going to do." "Okay, John." And he did. Run plaster is work that's not done to a great extent anymore. So we had some older guys come in and train young guys, because you daub plaster up on the wall, and then along a flat piece of lumber, you run a designed, patterned piece of sheet metal. And you have to do that a couple of times, and the plaster has to be just exactly the right consistency, or it'll fall off the wall. It won't hold its shape. So we recreated a whole bunch of apprentices then who could do that work again. That was very fun. So here's the cornerstone. John doesn't tell all of the story. He tells the story about finding the original cornerstone. It wasn't easy to find. And then taking the contents out, giving it to archives, newspapers, coins, and then putting back in appropriate things, a Sacramento Bee, a Sacramento Union, some coins of the time, maybe a letter signed by all the legislators. And as soon as all the bigwigs left, some of the people, I won't name any names, put in a Playboy magazine and some pantyhose. And that's what, and that's what's in the cornerstone that was set back in its proper place. Then the Matthews murals, which had been in the first floor, they go into, not the basement. We can't call it the basement, the lower rotunda. The reason we can't call it the basement is that's where the statue of Republican Governor Reagan is. Then John writes very well about the adventure. This is an original photo from about the 1906 period. That is the museum room that you can go and visit. You can't go in it, but you can peer from the door. The Parkeys had the terrible job, someone's got to do it, of scouring the country for the matching pieces of furniture that were in these photos. They traveled to the East Coast, where antiques are more readily available, and furnished the rooms. I think they did a fabulous job. And today, boy, talk about guarding Fort Knox. You know, only people who've been trained go in with white gloves to dust and clean their museum spaces. Really do a careful job. So that's fully described in the book too. And then finally comes the day it's celebrated. John writes that the chairman of the Joint Rules Committee, Lou Papin, said, I want a plaque for the front of this. I want your name on it, but you decide who else gets to be on there. I want my name on it, but you decide who else does. John knew that if he put this out for discussion, we'd still be talking about it, right? Whose name gets to be on the plaque. So he ordered the plaque, and he kept it under his desk until just before the gala, the party celebrating the project, and he had it mounted. Okay, if you want a copy of the book, it's available from the bookstore in the basement, the lower rotunda of the Capitol. And I have a few flyers as well. If you don't want to write that down, you can Google the bookstore very easily, California Capitol Bookstore, and that website will come up. With that, I'll take some questions.
First of all,
by the way, did I tell you this is the first time I've ever done this presentation? You're our guinea pig audience.
won't be the last time.
Okay, thank you.